Hello, it's Damien Martin, the host of the Simply Tax podcast, where we deliver practical and timely tax insights for you to help you keep up with the fast-paced change of the tax world. I know and understand as a tax accountant that the tax world has changed a lot lately, especially with tax reform, right? We've talked a lot about that on the podcast. And by the way, if you aren't subscribed, make sure you do subscribe out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. But today, obviously, if you haven't already noticed, we're trying something a little bit different here, and that's video. Wanted to give you a behind-the-scenes look, but you're going to have to bear with me a little bit because I have not done this video thing, like I said, first video. And by nature, I'm not really a guy that likes to be on video. That's primarily why I started hosting a podcast, right? But did want to give you those behind-the-scenes looks at some of the interviews we do, some of the podcasts. So that's what we're doing here today. And I'm actually really excited to share with you an interview that I had with Eric Hansen, who is the chair of the AICPA. And he's the chief operating officer at BKD. And we get to talking about the future of accounting and the accounting profession. Very interesting things he has to share there. He talks about the, what it's like to be the chair of the AICPA, which is a really, really awesome experience, I think, again. We also talk about something that's particularly challenging for me, which is integrating life inside of the office with life outside of the office, right? And kind of getting those two things together. We've talked a lot about that on the podcast already at times. But I think Eric is somebody that does that really, really well. And in addition to being a trailblazer in the accounting profession, he's I think somebody that's also managed to do that in a way that, he has a very successful family and whatnot that he's raised. So enough about that. Let's just jump into the interview. I'll check back in with you a little bit later. So without further ado, here's my interview with Eric Hansen. Today, it's a true honor to sit down with Eric Hansen, who is currently serving as the chair of the American Institute of CPAs and as the chief operating officer at BKD. So, Eric, I wrote this list down because you're a very active volunteer in the AICPA, and I wanted to share this because I think it's very impressive, and also if there's anything I leave off, be sure to let me know. But I know that you've served as the chair of the Finance Committee, as a member of the Compensation and the Audit Committees. You're part of the task force on the future of learning, and a member of the AICPA's Major Firms Group, the Board of Directors, and the AICPA's Governing Council. Mm-hmm. And you did all this while also being an active member in the Missouri CPA Society, obviously, and being in leadership at BKD. So very, very impressive. And I think what also impresses me is the giving back to the profession that you do. So could you talk a little bit about how you came to be so involved in giving back and also to serve as the chair of the largest member association of CPAs in the world?
Yeah. Well, I think giving back to the profession for me started pretty early in my career. When I was in Kansas City and involved with my profession at that time, working for BKD, being involved in industry associations that were in industries where I was working was really important. It was important from the standpoint of not only have a firm involvement, but also for me to be able to network and start gaining some leadership experience. So I'd say my early volunteer days was with HFMA, which is a lot of organization that a lot of people get involved in when they're in the healthcare space, and kind of work my way up through kind of board and positions of leadership within that. So that kind of started it. And then when I moved to Tulsa and continued working in a client-facing role in healthcare, continue with that association. And really, when I came back to Missouri as chief operating officer for BKD, that's when I got more involved with the Missouri Society. I got involved with the Future Learning Task Force, which was a really exciting task force to be involved with at that time, because I think there's still a lot of the findings that came out of that task force from a competency-based learning standpoint that we need to really embrace as a profession. And that kind of led to then getting involved with AICPA Council. AICPA Council then led to an opportunity to be on the board of directors. Mm-hmm. And that 3-year tenure, when it ended, provided an opportunity for me to serve in a leadership capacity as kind of vice chair leading into the chair role. So it's been probably just a progression of just a mindset of staying active in whatever space you're practicing in and working in, and being open to contribute your time and talents to those organizations.
So what's it like then to be the chair of the AICPA?
Well, I would say it's very humbling, first of all. It's an incredible organization, and for me, is very humbling. But at the same time, I think it's something that I've really benefited from, and I think our firm's benefited from the standpoint of being able to gain some insights into, what are really the leading trends that are going to be driving our profession forward and putting us in a position to take advantage of some of the things that are occurring from the standpoint of, some of the changes that are coming, such as future of audit and so forth. It's also been a really learning opportunity for me personally and professionally. There's so much that is going on that I really didn't even have a lot of insight into just as a practicing CPA, and being involved at the board level and now at a senior leadership volunteer level has really challenged me from the standpoint of you're constantly learning something new every day, and so that's exciting as well.
Oh, there's definitely a lot that the organization does, and we can talk more about some of that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, you mentioned the mindset that you had kind of going through and kind of successive roles of giving back. Maybe if there was a key mindset maybe to growing in leadership and taking on those positions, what would you say that it is for you?
I probably doing it for really just good intended reasons. I was really always, my mindset was always kind of doing it because it's the right thing to do. Not necessarily because it was going to kind of, advance your career or, gain you some advantage and so forth. Because, whether it's a professional organization or whether it's something like the AICPA that represents all of our CPAs across the country, part of it is just we need good people to contribute their time, not for any personal gain or opportunity they're seeking, but just because it's the right thing to do. And for me, that was my mindset, really. I didn't go into this thinking, okay, I can, get on council to become a board member. But, participating in council in an active way led to becoming a board member. I didn't serve on the board with the expectation or even the goal of becoming the chair of the board. Yet I tried to serve with, all my passion and talents and so forth. And then it led to that. So my mindset really was not from an expectation, this gets me to the next step. It was really more of it's the right thing to do for the organization, and just kind of approached every day with what can I do today, and do my best, and things will take care of themselves.
Well, you mentioned passion, and that's something I know, and just some of the listeners even that I talk to, that they, starting out in their career, that you kind of want to find, somebody like you. You're clearly passionate about what you do. How did you go about, I guess, finding that personal niche for you and the passion giving back to the profession, again, both AICPA and even just professionally at BKD? What's that been like?
That's a really hard question to answer because I would say my passion, first of all, I'm a very goal-oriented and probably you could argue, people would describe me as a very passionate person, but really it was, I would say I was inspired by others early in my career to succeed and achieve things that were afforded to me through the opportunity to be a part of BKD. And so very early on, some of the mentors I had, some of the partners that I worked with, they were inspirational to me. They encouraged me to get active and stay involved, and to use that as a platform to promote BKD, but also to develop my own leadership skills. And so I would say a lot of it was I was inspired by some of the young leaders that I interacted with. And at every stage throughout the course of my career, I can point to somebody who was within our firm or individuals I was working with outside of our firm who were really inspirational to me, and I would say motivating or challenging me to continue to not only contribute time and talents to organizations, but to really achieve success in life. And so I think, there's value in those kind of not formal, but very informal mentor relationships that you find of people who are really themselves passionate. They generally choose a positive attitude, which I really strongly believe in, of choosing your attitude and choosing a positive attitude and being inspired by them.
I think something that's very striking about you is you seem to do really, you excel at being able to execute on things like that, and you get the inspiration, but then you take the action from it. So, because I think that sometimes that's a difficult thing to do. Any thoughts on how that's worked for you and led to success again for you personally?
I think back to an event that occurred to me early on in my life. I went to an ACPA meeting, actually. I think it was a Missouri Hospital Association event, and I heard a speaker. His name was Tom Sullivan. And he was a very inspirational speaker, and he was blind, but he was a very accomplished businessman, very accomplished athlete, very accomplished musician, and his whole message was around pride. And the acronym that he used for pride was personal responsibility for individual daily effort. And I embraced that at that time. When I heard that, it was a really powerful message. And for me, I tried to really internalize that and personalize that in terms of how I approached every day, and truly do take personal responsibility for my individual daily effort. I can't control what other people do. I can help influence that, but I can't control that. But I really try to instill in people when I was a managing partner and in different leadership opportunities that I've had to really, for people to own that day and to take personal responsibility, not depend on somebody else, but to take personal responsibility to achieve whatever their goals were. And so I've embraced that through the course of my career and my life, both personally and professionally, and feel like that's been kind of I would say a guiding post for me throughout life. I try to instill that in my children as well.
Yeah.
That's even through scouting and everything else, is just really own stuff. Don't be looking for others, but do take personal responsibility for what you can control and what you can achieve, and things will work out for you.
I always like those little nuggets, right? And that's something you can focus on and just make actionable. So, and speaking about, I guess, daily, I know you're coming back to and talking about some of the roles and responsibilities as chair of the AICPA. You're kind of coming back here from a road tour, I guess, so to speak, right, of the council meetings. So I don't know if there's maybe any insights that you could share from those meetings and the conversations you've been having.
We did have regional council meetings last week, which is a series of 4 meetings, New York, Chicago, LA, and Dallas, back-to-back days with our governing council. And there was 3 agenda items that were on each of the meetings. The first was a professional issues update by Barry, which is always very insightful of what's going on, not only within the U.S., but around the world. The second was a CPA evolution in terms of what's the CPA of the future look like. I think one thing we would all agree to is that the skill set of the CPA in the future is going to be different than the skill set of the CPA today. And, the question is, how do we have a strategy that's inclusive of those skill sets within our profession? And how do we get those individuals certified? How do we get them, I call it kind of in the tent, so to speak, with the rest of the profession? So that's a very, very significant issue, and something that we're continuing to work with NASBA on and work with a variety of stakeholders on to really kind of, I would say, vet it and to kind of move that down the path of what is a CPA in the future, and how do we test it, how do we certify it, and how do we oversee it. The last topic, which I was involved in presenting, had to do with something that you would probably never even think about as a threat to our profession, but that's licensure at a statewide level and the threat that we are under right now. And it's a really growing, and I would call it a very clear and present danger to our profession of where states are, we're seeing legislation proposed at a state level that really threatens the CPA license as a credential itself. And it's all kind of under the auspice of reduced government and barriers to work and so forth. But there's a tremendous amount of effort we're putting forth at the AICPA level. We've got coalitions formed now with architects and with engineers that we're working on this with as well, to try to kind of battle this narrative that's out there about lowering the barriers to entry, which would in essence eliminate licensure requirements, including CPAs at a statewide level. So probably not something that's on your radar screen, probably not something that's on most people's radar screen. We were in Chicago at an FEI meeting last week together, and I asked that question, and I don't think I had any hands raised in terms of any awareness of that issue. But it's one of the biggest threats we have out there right now that we're combating, and it's a good example of where the advocacy group of the AICPA is working on our behalf on things that we really never even see, but they're really, really important and critical to our profession.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to that comment you made about all the things that the AICPA does that don't even necessarily have an awareness of, but as you do, there's great appreciation for it. But maybe could you unpack that a little bit of what the issue is, and maybe if there was somebody that wanted to get more involved, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I'll start with answering your second question, and that is how you can get involved. One is just be educated on it, and there's we're working on a website that's going to be launching now through the AICPA that's going to give toolkits and information about this. So there's going to be very quickly information that's going to be readily available through that. There's a lot of information that's available at state societies as well. And that would be how you'd get involved, is really through your state society. And I kind of challenged our council members last week to, be prepared to tell your story, because the reality is this narrative's out there in local governments, state governments, county governments, and so forth. And there's a lot of people voicing their stories about how we need to lower barriers that's really kind of working against us, so to speak. So I've kind of challenged council to kind of be prepared to tell what your story is, why licensure is important, and to be able to promote that in the network of stakeholders that you interact with, whether it's through Chamber of Commerce or something like that, kind of be a voice in that narrative, supporting why licensure for CPAs and other, I'm going to say learned professions, higher learned professions, is really important. And at the end of the day is important from the standpoint of protecting public safety and protecting the trust of the public in our case, financial markets and so forth.
Exactly, right? If audited financial statement, those are
Right.
Very meaningful things in terms of valuations
Right.
and so forth. So definitely protecting the public.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't want an unlicensed person doing an audit. I wouldn't want an unlicensed person building bridges that I'm driving my kids across the highway on. So it's kind of that's kind of common sense when I think about it. But the reality is there's a lot of legislation that's being proposed that would eliminate that.
Yeah, the bridge example is I mean, it really resonates, right? It clicks when you
now all of a sudden it's a
that way.
safety issue,
Right.
Safety that everybody can relate to.
Right, exactly,
Right.
exactly. A little bit more tangible from that perspective.
Right.
But well, now you mentioned the changes, and I know there's a lot of talk about change and disruption and all that's going on.
Right.
What do you see changing for the future of the accounting profession?
Well, I wish I could articulate everything. I think that's impossible to do. But I shared a video. We actually had it at our council meeting about 1.5 years ago, and I use it when I speak at state societies and FEI meetings and so forth. And the video has a quote in there from a futurist that made the statement that the 21st century will see 20,000 years of change. And what's behind that, obviously, is the effect of technology and a lot of the issues that are happening on a worldwide basis that's going to drive change. And if you think about that, 20,000 years of change in 1 century, it's hard to comprehend really what our profession will look like 10 years, 15, 30, 20 years down the road. But there is no doubt that things are going to change, and technology is a big driving force behind it, among other things. It's not just technology, but that's certainly one of them. I think the biggest impact, and probably the thing I'd like to maybe instill upon those that are listening to this, is this change is coming. And while we might be able to, stem the tides of that, some are going to work against the change. We're not going to stop it, and so it's going to come, and it will be here. And the challenge that I would put out there is that the skill set that you have today isn't going to be the skill set that's going to win the day in the not too distant future. So, we kind of are promoting this concept of literacy in the 21st century is who can unlearn and relearn, not who can read and write, but who can unlearn what they know and relearn what they need to know in the future. And that would be the challenge that I would put forth to your audience is if you really want to be successful and relevant in the future, you've got to embrace this notion of unlearning and relearning because you've got to have a different skill set, in the not too distant future to survive.
Yeah, those are difficult things to do.
They are.
A lot of times, right? Because you've kind of set your what you've learned, right?
Right.
So, I guess with that in mind, how is that going to shape, organizations such as ours, or even just the professionals like you and me that are working within accounting firms?
I think the successful organizations are going to figure it out, and they're going to invest in what they need to do to be able to retool, I'll call it upskill their workforce. And organizations that aren't committed to doing that don't really, they're either leaving it up to the individuals, or they don't really see that change coming, or they're kind of head in the sand and they're denying it, are really going to struggle to not only compete and keep up, but maybe survive in the future. So I think organizationally, quite frankly, it's a great opportunity to have an advantage if you're really committed to upskilling your people. And because I think there's going to be some that really either are slower to that game or are in denial mode, and they're not going to really be committed to that. So it's going to require a lot of not only capital investment, but it's going to require a lot of human capital investment, people's time. And that's hard to find in terms of time in today's world. But it's going to be necessary, again, to be relevant in the future.
Again, you were mentioning that last week saw you in Chicago at an FEI event. You were speaking and talking about maybe that it's a little bit different for kind of where you are, phase of career and so forth.
Right.
I guess, again, somebody coming out of school, kind of just starting their career, maybe first couple of years. What are your thoughts on that? What's something that they can be focusing on skill-wise or otherwise to kind of keep up with these changes?
Right. The example I used was within even like our organization, I kind of put people into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 being those that are, right out of college in that first few years of their career. And the reality is they're kind of learning what they need to know to be successful in the work that they're doing. And we're teaching that. We're giving them very active training. There's a lot of mentoring that's taking place. And so I don't worry as much about that cohort because they're really they're kind of on the job learning what they need to know today. Then there is bucket 3, which is going to be kind of those that are closer to retirement, and pick your number of years, whatever you're comfortable with. But, somebody, let's say 5 years or less from retirement, they're going to be more challenged to actually make the investment to change, because they kind of see the finish line in sight. Change is hard. They have to invest a lot of time in it.
Right.
And I do believe that a lot of the change that's coming is going to maybe accelerate maybe the time frame by which some of those individuals choose to leave our profession, because they're not going to be willing to go through another change. And then there's everybody else in between, which is the vast majority of our employees and partners. And they simply have too long of a runway to not embrace the need to change and to upskill their skill set to be relevant in the future. And again, that's why we as an organization have to be very committed to that. That's why I think there's going to be, training organizations are going to have some real opportunities to be able to contribute to organizations that want to do this. And there's going to be some that kind of are in denial, and they're going to really suffer as a result of it.
And there's always the stereotype that accountants don't like change, right?
Right.
Which is probably
humans don't like change.
I would say it's a human nature thing,
that's
right? We don't
right.
like change, but so it's always going to be difficult, perhaps, to navigate some of those changes.
Right.
So, what are things that you think leadership needs to do to successfully navigate that change?
Well, I think first of all, we have to educate people that there's a need to change, because until somebody is educated on it, embraces the need for it, they're going to be resistant to it or not supportive of it. So I think part of what we're trying to do in leadership within BKD through all of our different channels, managing partners, regional managing partners, national office leadership, is to really, kind of educate our people on, what is happening, what is the environment we're in, and kind of what's the business case for doing what it is that we're proposing to do, which is a significant investment in kind of redoing how we're gonna be auditing in the future, and have to retrain our people on new tools, new technologies to be relevant. Same way on the tax side, same way on the consulting side. So I think our role as leaders is to initially educate, and then make the commitment to give the resources to put behind the necessary education that needs to take place.
On the future of the profession, are there any other topics, I guess, that come to mind, especially after coming out of council last week, that maybe are fresh on your mind?
I just think we're really at a time in our profession where there's going to be lots of change, and our profession is going to look very differently in the future, and it's a very exciting time. I mean, I know that can be frightening to some, but I think it's a really exciting time. There's great opportunities that are going to evolve and emerge as a result of a lot of the changes that are going to take place. And for those that really want to jump in and embrace it, and commit themselves to the training and the skilling that's going to be necessary, the opportunities are going to be endless, and probably more opportunities than we've ever had in the past. So I'm very, very bullish and very excited about it. But again, we've got to make a commitment to prepare ourselves for the future.
Yeah. Well, and I guess when we've talked about on the podcast too about all the changes with tax reform, and that there were some very significant ones, and if you again sort of forget what was there before, we've layered on new changes.
Right.
So this is maybe a little dose of perhaps what's to come in the future.
Right. And even in the tax area, I look at that and think about a lot of things that we're kind of forecasting for the future in the area of tax. Tax is a consulting and compliance service, and it's a it's a service line for most firms. But as we look at the technology impact on tax going forward, and the effect that's going to have, even on the market changes that are going to occur as a result of that, a lot of the lower end tax work is really going to be automated, and there's probably going to be a lot of returns done today, a significant number of returns done today that don't even need to be done in the future. They're just going to be done by the government. Absolutely. Technology exists to be able to do that today, and so really kind of evolving even tax into more of a holistic type of service line, where people want tax as a compliance service, but they also want a lot of planning that goes along with that, life planning, whether it's estate planning and so forth, whether it's investments. There's just a lot of things around kind of tax is just one component of a big life planning type of wheel, and really evolving our mindset and our skill set. Again, getting back to that kind of learning a new skill set that's going to be necessary, I think, in the future to really be successful in that area, particularly on the personal tax side.
Something that immediately struck me, in working with you and meeting you, Eric, is just, we talked about the passion for the work, but you have a passion for just life as well.
Yeah.
And I know that, again, something that's often talked about these days is sort of this work-life balance.
Right.
How do you approach that, and what does that mean for you?
Well, it's work-life balance, work-life integration. There's a lot of different terms that are thrown out there now. For me, it's always been an important thing to achieve, and I was very blessed earlier in my career that I worked for some partners and some professionals within BKD who were, I would say, mentors of mine in an informal sense, but mentors of mine who I felt like had achieved that kind of work-life balance. And so when I watched and studied them, they worked hard and they made a big commitment to BKD, but they also made a big commitment to their family. And there's times when you have to sacrifice on both sides of that equation. And so early on, my wife and I both, we committed that, we're going to pursue this career, but at the same time, we're going to have priorities, and our priorities are going to be, our family's going to be as an important priority as my career would be, or as Jana's career would be. And you just have to kind of balance that in terms of, allocating time and resources and making decisions on what you do and where you go and those type of things. So, when my kids were growing up, I didn't just try to attend games. I tried to be active in the types of things they were involved in. So, when my kids were playing soccer, I tried to coach them at a young age when I still could. Got to a certain level I couldn't. So it's a matter of being actively involved with them, and that develops relationships with your kids that carry throughout life. When my two boys were in Boy Scouts, I didn't just drop them off. I actually went and attended. I volunteered. I became a scoutmaster in our troop where I was part of the the fabric of what was going on. And that was really important. And honestly, that also helped develop me from a leadership standpoint. And you never know when those relationships can also develop business opportunities, and they do. And so again, I think you can successfully blend the two, but you got to be committed to making both a priority at the right time, and recognizing that there's a lot of sacrifice that goes with that along the way.
And I imagine that's, like you said, it changes over time,
right,
perhaps. And what mechanism have you used successfully to maybe figure out when you need to make a sacrifice on one side or the other and navigate those sorts of things?
Well, there's a lot of judgment that goes into that, of course. Usually, if I listened to my wife, she would give me a pretty good answer as to what the right answer would be at that point in time. But joking aside, I mean, it's just you got to just be in tune with what is necessary at the firm and kind of both what's necessary in your personal life to do it. Going back to that personal responsibility for individual daily effort, that's both personal and professional. And I can remember doing a lot of things that required me to take time and go and coach or do whatever, but then come back to the office or work at home late, and you just find ways to get it done. I mean, people do that every day in this profession. But for me, it was never about work first and work only. It was about, my career has been, I've had a very blessed career at BKD, but I've also used that as a way to, have a blessed life with my family and my children and with people who we interact with through the programs and organizations they were involved in. So it's a real balance, and you just have to find what works for you.
And I've had an opportunity, actually, you were awarded the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award, which I think is just fantastic. I went to that awards ceremony, and
right.
I knew you have two sons and a daughter that were there as well, and
right.
speaking about that, and again, the scouting experience. And I just remember thinking, man, I need to ask Eric, what's some advice you have on that, navigating the family and the raising the kids right, because you seem to have done that very successfully.
Well,
what do you think?
We have great kids. We're very blessed from that standpoint. There's no perfect formula for raising kids. They're
Sure.
all different, and everybody's life is different and their situations are different. But we made time every day to not just, I would say, care for our kids, but to engage with our kids. As an example, for our family, it was always important that when I was in town, when I was first probably 20 years of my career, I traveled a lot, but I was in town a lot too. And family dinners were our time. And so I would come home, I'd always be involved in our family dinners, even if I had to go back or work at home or whatever. Mm-hmm. And my kids still today kind of joke with me and make fun of me about this, but at dinner time, we would go around the table and we would do highs, lows, and good turns. And, basically it was what was the high for the day for you, what was really good about your day, what was bad about your day, and what good turn did you do for somebody? What did you do to bless somebody else? And, even at a very young age, the kids, they that made them think about, what was good about the day to day and what was bad. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about, whatever that was with them, to unpeel that a little bit and to dig into it with them in a meaningful way. And then the good turn was the one that always kind of threw him, because, it's kind of like, well, they're coming up with some pretty creative good turns, I would say. But again, it kind of is that constant reminder of, you got to be a blessing to other people as well, and always be thinking about, putting other people's needs first as well. So, we did things like that just prompted some good interaction, and I think hopefully established some good values in the kids growing up that, carried with them throughout their life.
It definitely seems that way from having met them and just kind of seeing you guys interact. So that's a great one. I think it's the daily thing, right? Just kind of keep it checked in. So I know, again, we talked about the family kind of work-life balance integration. I do kind of look at it as integration as well. But what are some things outside of the family that you do outside of the office, kind of on a personal level from the life perspective?
Well, not much the last couple of years, but
you've been a very busy guy, Eric.
Between BKD and AICPA, it's been a pretty busy couple of years. But we still enjoy a lot of things that we grew up doing with our kids. I still enjoy mountain biking and road biking. Both of my boys are very active riders, both mountain biking and road biking as well. We all enjoy skiing, hiking, camping, outdoor activities. So, it's usually things that are kind of centered around just nature and outdoor. And that's one of the things that I'm really, I look at my kids now and their interests. They're all out of college, living on their own throughout, different places of the country. And, they're still very, active in the things that we grew up doing together, which is rewarding for me, because the types of things that we kind of created as activities have now become their hobbies, and they're very passionate about them. Yeah. And even in my son's case, my oldest son, his whole career is now built around, biking and sustainability of biking, and with the University of Arkansas and so forth. So, it's led to a career for him as well. So it's usually going to be around outdoor things. I wish I could say I played the piano more than I do, but I am playing the piano more now than I
That's great.
Probably ever have. And I hope to be able to get back to that. That's something that I learned as a young child. I think I've shared with you. My grandmother was my first piano teacher, and I do enjoy that as kind of a break as well.
Yeah, I actually have had the opportunity to play on your piano before, I guess.
You're much better than me, but
I don't get to play as much anymore either. But that's interesting though, because I do like it's a good outlet. I find to focus on something else. And
even as we've been traveling so much, and then when we come back home, our piano's right there in the living room, so I pass it every time I walk back to my bedroom. And so I've kind of, every time I go by it, every day I try to sit down and play a little bit, even if it's just for 5 minutes or so, just to kind of keep that, it takes me back, honestly, to when I was young and when I played a lot. And it relieves your mind of the stress of whatever it is you're focusing on, because you're focused on that. So, so I do enjoy it.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear you're keeping up with the playing. So we kind of covered a lot of ground here, Eric. Again, very impressive, the work you're doing with the AICPA, the firm, personally, professionally. What are some closing thoughts that maybe you'd leave everybody with?
I don't have any magical nuggets of wisdom. I'd probably share maybe the same thing I shared with a group of students that I was with recently about kind of advice on how they live life. And that is, to live outside your comfort zone. I mean, we talk about, the change that's coming and the need to, unlearn and relearn, and just, professional development opportunities that come along. And the only way to do that is to really be uncomfortable in the way that you live. And I believe in servant leadership. I really, subscribe to that kind of philosophy. But I think the misnomer in that is people think service leadership is making everybody happy, making them content, and keeping everybody comfortable. And I think if we're leaders in today's world and we're truly caring about those that we're leading, we're going to push them outside their comfort zone. And there's no way we can keep everybody in their comfort zone and prepare them for the future, because they've got to get uncomfortable. So, living 10% outside your comfort zone would be my advice, and to constantly look for new things, new skills, live outside of your comfort zone. And soon that 10% becomes comfortable, and you can kind of keep expanding, what the next 10% is. And that's how you're going to grow professionally and personally. And, again, that would probably be the piece of advice I'd leave with the group.
Well, I've heard you say that one before, and I'll admit I'm trying to write things down a little bit more, and I did that, and that one's really been kind of revisit that, because I think that is a great reminder and a good way of looking at it.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that was a pretty good nugget there, Eric, despite the fact that maybe you say otherwise. But well, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been an honor to sit down and talk with you a little bit. Again, kind of reached out to a few people, got some questions in here because I know a lot of people were, would love to kind of know how you got to where you are. So thank you for sharing that today. And
well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, we'll keep on and look forward to more in that change in the future of the profession ahead. So.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that coming. So again, commit yourself to the future through your learning and development, and you're going to find success. So.
Well, thanks for checking out our first video. I really do want to know what you think about it. As I mentioned, it's kind of a learning experience for me because I've never done these before, obviously, right? First one. So leave us a comment below so that kind of hear what you liked about it, maybe what you didn't. If there's topics that you'd like us to cover, if you'd like a behind the scenes look at other interviews that we do, leave us a comment, let us know. And then also let me know what you think the skill that will be the most significant and most important for the future of accounting. There's a lot of change coming, right? Disruption, all the things that Eric talked about. So I want to know what you think about it and why you think that skill will be most important. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit notifications. We do have some exciting content coming. We're working on our first video series that we're going to be sharing with you soon. So again, turn on the notifications so you know when it's there. That's it for today. Again, if you haven't already, leave the comment below. I do really want to know what you think. So until next time, I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for watching.